Hello everybody. Today I'm going to talk about a couple different things. Some of it's going back to the basics, which is really important no matter where you're at. We're going to talk about little t trauma versus big T trauma. We're going to talk about heartbreak and relationships, positive bonding patterns, and how that plays into the acuteness oftentimes of the pain that we experience in heartbreak. And we're going to talk about merging versus meeting. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the space. So, the basics. Sometimes I forget about the basics because I've been so entrenched in this work for the last 4 years. And then I meet somebody, a client of mine, who is kind of just at the beginning of really starting to understand this stuff. The place that I was at, the place that every single other person has to be at in order to get to wherever you are now. So one of the things, let's just get into big T versus little t trauma. So when the majority of people hear the word trauma, what a lot of people think about is big shit, sexual assault, war, big stuff that stands out. And all of that is coming from the perspective of an adult, right? We grow up, and then we have a hard time empathizing with or really understanding the perspective of what it is like to be a child. And yet, ironically, we are carrying the wounds of those children and it's up in our face. So we have no choice really but to look at it. Now, I know that there's people who experience trauma later in life, whether that's from a relationship that they were in, a war, being a veteran, whatever, a car accident, a loss. And we can tend to just focus on that as if that's the only thing that's happening. But these early experiences, oftentimes the things that we would not categorize as trauma, act as sort of like, it's like the very beginning of whatever that emotional or energetic pattern that was created, or nervous system pattern that was created. That is like a little tiny fracture, okay? And that little fracture becomes a point of attraction within your field. And so what I notice is that people can tend to dissociate from the things that happen later to them in their life and the connection that has, wow, I just said that has to their earlier experiences. And, there's adults who have really great relationships with their parents, whose parents were not, let's say, abusive, right? Even if the person experienced abuse, it was not the intention of their parents to do that. I'm going to say that the majority of caregivers are not out here trying to intentionally harm their kids. But fundamentally, we have to understand that 99.99999% of the human population is fragmented. And a lot of people don't know how to deal with their emotions. And what we know is that even the most conscious parent is attuning to a baby correctly 50% of the time. And what attuning is it's the ability to feel what another being is feeling, to respond appropriately to the cues that infant or that child is putting out. Now, obviously, when you're a baby and you don't have access to speech, the only thing that you can really do is make sounds and body movements and cues. And you are completely dependent on your caregiver's ability to read those cues for you to have your needs met. So it's not intentional for most people. But everybody has trauma. And even the people who are saying, I have a great relationship with my parents, I'm fine. Now, I get that a lot of you guys who are in these communities, you've already come to this conclusion, but for those who haven't, that it's not about demonizing your parents and saying your parents are bad, they hurt you, they traumatize you. No, it's about recognizing that we are in a fundamentally unawakened society that is in such a dense state that we're not actually able to feel what another human being is feeling. And that includes being able to respond to the needs of a child. So you didn't get all your needs met. Nobody did. You did not get all your emotional needs met. You may have had your physical needs met. Some people did not have their physical needs met. But when we're talking about like little t trauma too, a lot of times it's the things that didn't happen. So it's like, well, my parents didn't beat me, or they didn't abandon me, but it's the lack of clarity around what do I do with my emotions. It's the little tiny moments where you come home and you're really upset about something, and your parent just kind of sweeps that under the rug and says, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it, we can just do this other thing, it's totally fine. Like, let's say you got cut from a sports team or something like that, and they go, don't worry about it, we'll just get you involved in something else, you're going to be great, it's fine. Well, what wasn't there in this moment, and how would you know what you were missing as a child if you never even had a concept that something like that was even possible or could exist? Your experience is going to be one of unconsciously fragmenting from your own emotions, or feeling totally powerless to deal with, like, okay, so there is no room for my emotions, and it's not malicious, it's not even necessarily conscious. I'm going to say it's not conscious, but the unconscious message received in that is, well, there is no room for my emotion, so I better sweep that under the rug, I better fragment from that part of myself and push it far, far away. And then it's like, oh yeah, and then we get these echoes of that trauma, that little t trauma that you would not, as an adult, say that that's trauma, but it was. And then we start to get those echoes later on in life, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so when I see somebody who's an adult who's saying to me, I had this really horrific, it's like I'm seeing like big major T events as an adult, and they're telling me that everything is completely fine with their childhood, I have to stop them and say, that's not true. That is what you are perceiving through your adult lens, but that is not the experience that you had as a child. How could you possibly be an adult with no or little capacity to process emotional experiences? Or how could you possibly be an adult with addiction or with dysfunctional relationship patterns and then say that you didn't experience trauma, whether that's what was there or what wasn't there, the validation that wasn't there, the emotional support that wasn't there, the hugs that weren't given, the praise that wasn't given, right? So we have to really start to shift our idea about what trauma is. And this is kind of surprising to people, but some of the most traumatic things wasn't even the events as a child that you would imagine would be horrific. Sometimes it's, I didn't get the candy bar in the store that I wanted. And in that moment, what I internalized was, I cannot create. Because not only am I saying you can't have this, but I'm not going to give you a way to get it yourself. So I'm teaching you that you are powerless to getting what you want and need. And it's so subtle, But that moment, or multiple of those moments, build up. And when we internalize those things, which we always do as a child, we always internalize these things, then it leads to these much bigger issues, these much bigger negative belief systems that we have, or these fractures within our personality, these primary selves that get put up in the front, the ones that helped us to survive in those social situations with our family. And then the suppressed aspects that were not okay, that get shoved under the rug, that are screaming for us. And then we lift up the rug and we go, hey buddy, how long have you been under there for? Oh, like 30 years. Okay, well, it's amazing because once we start to connect to those parts of us, there's so much relief. It's not the tsunami that we think it's going to be, because from the perspective of a child, an emotional experience that I have no container for and I have no guidance for is like a fucking tsunami. And so it feels like it's going to swallow us whole. But then we actually have a relationship with this emotional experience. We have a relationship with this part of us, and suddenly there's a feeling of relief. Why is that? Because we're taking something that was fragmented and disconnected, which is never going to feel good for anyone, and we're bringing it back into the whole of who we are and allowing that to be there. Okay, so that's the first piece. Everybody has experienced trauma. You cannot be walking on this planet and not experience trauma, because every human being here is fragmented, which means they're fragmented from themselves, and they are most definitely going to be behaving in ways that are disconnected from you. Period. Okay, so that's the first piece. The second piece that I want to talk about is relationships and these positive bonding patterns that we find ourselves in, and heartbreak. So first of all, I want to say that I really do believe that the loss of a relationship is the most painful thing that a physical human can endure. I think it's more painful than rape. I think it's more painful than torture. I think it's more painful than physical abuse. Now, that's a pretty bold statement to make, and that's just my perspective. Certainly, there are other people that are going to feel differently, and I totally value and honor that. But loss of connection, which is really what all of those other things I just listed, that's loss of connection. That's loss of connection even to yourself. But that heartbreak is something that nobody gets free from. Nobody. And when you're in it, it can feel like you're the only person who's in it. It can feel like you're going to die. And why does it feel like you're going to die? Because we're working with developmental trauma. We're working with attachment trauma. And for a physical baby, if you cannot maintain the connection with your caregiver, if you cannot get them to meet your needs, you will die. Right? I'm a baby. Wah! I can't take care of myself. I can't feed myself. I can't do anything. So this is also why fragmentation is the primary way that we cope here. You better find a way to fragment from yourself. You better find a way to fit in with your family system and with your social group. Otherwise you die, right? Because we're super dependent on our parents, like for a long ass time. Can a 2-year-old take care of themselves? No, we've got years of being dependent on these people. And how connected we remain to ourselves as children is completely dependent on the level to which the caregivers are able to connect with us and be benevolent towards us. So what ends up happening? So there's that, right? I just want to validate and acknowledge that every single one of us have gone through it. All of us are probably going to go through it again at some point, whether it's the loss of a parent or the loss of a loved one or a partner, whether that's from a breakup or from a death. And yet, we are fortified because of that experience. If none of us are able to escape that, then there must be something really important about that experience that teaches us something. And what it teaches us is not to shut down, not to not let people in, not to not have intimacy, but it's to learn how to have intimacy in a different way, to learn how to have me and have you at the same time, to learn how to meet and not merge, to learn how to be fortified through the pain of having gone into a positive bonding pattern, which I'm going to explain what that is in a moment, so that we learn to never farm our inner children out to other people ever again. Our inner kids can come out, our vulnerable parts can come out, they can play, they can meet, but they are always coming back with you at the end of the day, because it's not safe to give your most vulnerable selves to other human beings who are flawed, who have trauma, who may change their mind. And what I'm going to explain what a positive bonding pattern is, okay? It feels so good. Positive bonding patterns, it's not positive, it's called that because there's a mutually symbiotic thing happening. Positive bonding patterns, most people don't recognize that it's happening because they don't want to recognize that it's happening because, it feels so good. And it's so sneaky. It's like when you first meet somebody and you just feel like the way that they care for you is unlike anything you've ever felt before, and you feel so valued and important because the way that you care for them is unlike anything that they've ever had before. And the thing about a positive bonding pattern, I have a whole video on this, but it's good to review it. It's good to just repeat things over and over again because we've got to get this stuff. The thing about a positive bonding pattern is that oftentimes you are doing something for that person that they are not really doing for themselves. And they're doing something for you that you're not really doing for yourself. So you've got their little girl or little boy in your hand and you're like, yeah, I've got your little one. Oh, you've got my little one. Oh, that's great. But then something happens. A trigger happens. God forbid they're a human being. And they drop little Johnny or little Sally in the middle of traffic. And they just leave them there. And it feels like somebody takes your heart and rips it out of your chest and stabs you to death, right? The betrayal! How could you do that to me? I gave you my most vulnerable self. And you did that? And then what happens is we go into a negative bonding pattern. By the way, before I talk about that, in a positive bonding pattern, there is a feeling of this person needs me. There's kind of a feeling of like, I don't want to say like viewing them as pathetic, but you've heard those kind of tropes of, oh, what would you even do without me doing your laundry? Or, he would be so lost without me. That's a positive bonding pattern. And what it does is it never allows that person to rise up. If I'm always holding the energy that they actually need to claim for themselves, which I'm going to say is why we were attracted in the first place, because, oh, you have something that I'm missing. Oh, you have something that I'm missing. And then sometimes we just try to like hang out with that person to just like get it through them, instead of acknowledging what is it about this person that I need to actually resurrect within myself. So when we play into those roles, we don't actually honor the other person's capacity, and we prevent them from growth. So we've dropped each other's kids, and now we're heading into a negative bonding pattern. And that is where my inner parent is going to come up to protect my inner kid, because you just dropped her in traffic. So I'm going to respond maybe the way that one of my parents responded. I might be angry. There's a whole range of ways that we could respond. We could withdraw. We could verbally attack. We could physically attack, God forbid. We could any number of things, right? Usually it's outgoing or it's incoming, right? We may even harm ourselves in some way if we've really learned to internalize that. And so my parent comes out and I'm like, let's say I decide to yell at you, like, stupid fuck, whatever. And then what happens is this person gets triggered, right? Because now we just dropped their inner kid. And they're like, oh, you said you were going to take care of him. And now, look, you were usually so nice, and now you're yelling at me? How could you be doing that, right? So then what happens is, here comes their inner parent. And what happens is, before you know it, we have two inner parents yelling at each other. And guess what? My inner parent who's yelling at them, I'm not hitting their parent. I'm hitting their kid. Their inner kid is the one who's feeling what I'm saying. And that's why their inner parent then got triggered to come up. And their inner parent may be meaning to hit my adult self, but who feels it is the kid in me. But what happens in a negative bonding pattern is, if you notice, I'm yelling at you, you're yelling at me. I'm not looking at my inner child, by the way. I may look like I'm protecting her, but all my focus is on you. So she's fucking, I don't know where she is. She's like off. She's crying in a corner somewhere. You're not paying attention to your inner kid because you're looking at me. And yet they're both in pain. And so how do we resolve this? Well, people either go back into the positive bonding pattern where they go, okay, let me pick up your kid. Like, I'll pick her back. I'll pick him back up. All right. Or somebody steps into the aware ego and turns around towards their own inner kid and says, okay, I'm going to take my focus off of you and I'm going to put this focus towards him or her. Right? You pick up that little inner part of you. You come back into your adult awareness, and then you have a conversation with that person from that place, right? So one or both people have to come out of that protector, and both people are going to have to take care of their own inner children. So how does this relate to meeting versus merging? So in a positive bonding pattern, this is merging. Now, we may consciously choose to merge in union for moments of deep intimacy, but you come back out. And if you're going to do that, you better have a damn solid sense of self so that you don't become enmeshed and lose yourself in that person, so that a part of you doesn't break off inside of them. Because when they're human, and if things don't work out, you are going to feel that much more devastated because you placed the most vulnerable part of yourself inside of them. And when you lost them, it feels like you lost that part of yourself because you dissolved into the relationship. So this is me, this is you, two whole ass beings, and we're meeting. And these are all the places where we meet. These are all the places in this middle, this space here. This is the relationship. This is the third element that we occupy together. But I am not lost, and you are not lost. And should they choose to step out of the pool, if we're talking about like a kiddie pool and we're both getting in the kiddie pool and the relationship is the kiddie pool and this person decides to step out, I am not going to break myself, because like imagine that my fingers were scissors. Okay, this is the parts of me that have merged into that other person, right? Snip, they're gone. No, they're gonna break away, and I'm still a fucking whole ass human being. That doesn't mean I'm not gonna have feelings. It doesn't mean it's not gonna be painful. We cannot avoid that, but it will not be as devastating, because we can remain in that space of knowing I've got me. And there is nothing more safe than you. You couldn't leave you ultimately if you really even tried, because all of the parts of you that you lost or that got, taken down to the subconscious basement, they're still there. They still share a body with you, and whether you're aware of them or not, they're there. You need to be the one who will never leave you. Can you honestly say that? Can you honestly say that your relationship with yourself is so good that you would never leave you? Most people can't. I can't say that I've never left myself. I can't say that I'm in a place where I never abandon myself, where I'm always in alignment and all of my parts are always on the same page. But it's a work in progress. And I abandon myself so much less than I used to. And I am being really mindful of entering into any kind of relationship, friendship, partnership from a space of meeting. Because in this place of meeting, I can appreciate and value the initiation that you bring me. You may be here to show me what I've lost or cut off from in myself, and I might start to become aware of that through the judgments that I have about you, or from whatever you trigger in me. You may show me parts of myself that are beautiful. And in a lot of cases, some of the most devastating heartbreak that we go through, the one that feels like we just can't believe it, those are the people who were contracted to push you so far into a corner where you had no choice but to come home. And you better thank God for those people, because we are so stubborn. We have to be pushed into a corner. Most of us have to be pushed into a corner. Most of us have to be on our goddamn knees, stripped of everything, before we finally choose ourselves, to love ourselves, and to come home. So thank you. Thank you. Oh God, thank you for breaking my heart. Thank you. Because you brought me back to a place within myself that is unbreakable. That is a gift. That is only possible to recognize that from this space. And this space, this is you. This is the whole of you. Ooh, that's all, folks. That's all we have today. That was a banger. Boss Monster says, I think that's what my relationship with drugs was. It pushed me into a corner. And now I'm back, bitch. Let's take a moment. Take a moment of silence for all the people. Take a moment of silence for all the people who are here, who found their way back home. And if you are not fully back home, which none of us really are, we're on our way back home. And whatever little pieces we like, you know, because don't get me wrong, I think we've all been in a place of going, I think I'm so good. I think I could do this. I think I'm in a secure place within myself. I think I'm ready to get into that relationship. And then you're like, well, actually, I was single for 2 years and nobody was triggering me, and actually all this shit's coming up right now and I'm not as healed as I thought I was. And then we say, okay, we're gonna keep working with that. That's okay. Thank you for bringing me back home. So yeah, moment of silence for all the people in your life who broke your heart. Moment of silence for all the people in your life who didn't meet your needs, who couldn't be what you wanted them to be, who dropped you, who abandoned you, who betrayed you, who didn't see you for who you really are, and say thank you. Because there was no way that I was going to come home to myself on a fucking silver platter, chilling out, getting every single thing that I could possibly need and want, right? You became a diamond. That shit refined you. It fortified you in the fires. If you can do that, if you can get through all the things you've already been through in your life, you can get through whatever's next. That's all. Thank you guys so much for being here today.